Hello and welcome everyone to another Art Toolkit demo. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by artist Gavin Snider, New York-based artist. And Gavin, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Maria. I really appreciate the opportunity to get on here and paint.
Oh, it's such a treat.
Hello and welcome
let me
everyone
pause that
to
little extra
another
audio
Art
there.
Toolkit
Excuse me.
demo.
There we go. Yeah, I've been following your work for years and love your approach to painting, particularly architecture. You've got these sort of bold colors, use of like negative space, and of course, love all the peeks into New York City of just the amazing architecture.
Thank you.
And yeah, you're here today to help share with us a little bit of that.
Yeah, gonna have a brownstone image to paint and gonna kind of walk through my process, my approach to watercolor, and hopefully, let anybody paint along and have a little fun along the way. So.
Well, I'll just mention to everyone too that I'll be watching the chat. And Gavin, I got to let you know that we have people from Seattle, California, Paris, France, Park City, Utah, South Carolina, Alberta, Canada, Colorado, Vermont, Minnesota, really all over joining us today. And those
Amazing.
of you joining live, anytime you've got questions, I'll really do my best to catch them and relay them to Gavin. So we're really excited to have you all here. And
Great. That's fantastic.
Gavin, can you share a little bit of your background and what got you sort of your path to becoming an artist?
Yeah, I have a background in architecture, and a lot of people, want to be an architect because they like to draw, and I was no different. I started probably drawing when I was 3 years old, 2 years old, as soon as I could, you know, hold a pen or a pencil or a crayon. My twin brother Grant and I sort of had this back-to-back easel that my mom and dad had made for us, and we would just, go and create these worlds. And so I've been drawing my whole life, and that led me to go to architecture school with the hope that somehow you can turn this passion and creativity into an honest profession, which I guess I did. But then in architecture school, you sort of um, you're doing so much technical drawing and so much drafting and so much you're thinking about so many other things and seeing the world in so many different ways. You start to move away a little bit from drawing, and actually it wasn't until really later in my school years where I almost like stopped drawing completely in architecture school if it wasn't for a project, and kind of lost it. And then I got back into it by doing like ridiculous, over the top, kind of silly band poster, concert poster drawings for my band, other bands in town, at the University of Kansas. And that kind of like sparked my passion again, leading me somehow circuitously back to drawing architecture, when I sort of discovered urban sketching. Didn't really know that was a thing, didn't know that a community existed. And then one day I was just kind of like, whatever I'm doing isn't really clicking. Like, I need something. And I went out with just a sketchbook and a pen and drew a place in Kansas City called Sour Castle. It's kind of this old legendary haunted house in Kansas City, Kansas. And it was such a transformative experience to be there on site drawing architecture, but having to like totally flip my brain in a new way and do it in such a way that's quick and responsive. And you're, kind of having this experience, which isn't always good. It's almost like, you know, it's almost like an athletic event. And then, after that drawing, posting it online, and I think this was the era of Facebook, maybe even before Instagram, and realizing that there's actually a huge community of people doing this exact same thing, all over the world. And so that was kind of, a really transformative thing too, is to see all the different styles and all the different ways other people sort of find their practice. Lately, I moved on from pen and ink, to watercolor, and that's been sort of a transformative experience. And that's what I'll be showing today, is sort of how I approach architecture through watercolor. The same way I do when I'm on site or out in the world, but here I'll be doing it from my studio.
Oh, I love that. And I love the community aspect of urban sketching because it really is so inspiring to see different approaches, especially if you're out sketching like some similar subjects and all the different ways people can approach it. And I learn so much from other people, and I know from you too. And thinking about your architecture background. Sometimes I think that's a little superpower, folks who have that architecture background and like sort of construct, deconstructing buildings maybe. And so I'm.
Yeah, it definitely comes in handy in New York, I guess. And it's almost like a motion, a practice, or sort of a second nature of whatever, drawing a straight line or a window mullion or something. But
Yeah.
I also think it's something you have to actively fight against because when you're creating that work of art, um, you can't be so bogged down in the technical details and you can't be worried about
Right.
everything just so, which is what architects, love to worry about. So it's almost like you have these two competing your left brain and your right brain competing, and it's really a really fun opportunity to explore both.
Well, I like your description of sketching on site as an athletic event because it certainly can feel like that with some of you've got, your time constraints, your subject constraints, and of really turning yourself over to that process. And I appreciate hearing about that tension too, of sort of how much you capture the reality of something in front of you versus some of that creative license that brings your artistic voice of, the colors and sort of a style and how you put
Yeah.
it on paper.
And the thing is, you said it's fun to see other people's interpretations of the same subject, which of course is always so true, especially in New York when you have these sort of iconic places. But it's also fun to go back and see your interpretation of the subject in a different light, in a different period of your artistic life, in a different mood or in a different, climate or weather. It's really amazing to kind of see how far you've come or just the different ways you can approach the same thing. I love that about New York is that it's so easy to just pop out of your house, jump on the train, go to Grand Central, and for me, that's kind of like my home base where I do the same painting every year and just see where I'm at this year. And so, yeah, it's almost like you'll never be able to create that same those same conditions that led you to make this work on site, which is something I love. You always be doing something new and different, no matter if it's the exact same subject.
Oh, I love that practice that you revisit the same subject. That I don't know
Yeah,
if you've got
I think artists have done that
those.
before in the past, right?
Yeah, but see, every year I'd love to see the series if you ever have them online. Share them with
Yeah,
us.
oh, that's a great idea. I should share that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Gia, how about we pull up your desk? I'd love to hear about some of the supplies you enjoy using, on site and in your studio. And then you mentioned too that our inspiration for today is an image that we put the link in our description, and I'll go ahead and post it in the chat in just a minute too. Was just from like your morning walk, which I
Yes,
love. You're in such a different place than me.
I had been, kind of scouting all these different, knowing that I'm going to paint the architecture of Brooklyn for this workshop, scouting all these different brownstone locations throughout, Park Slope, Greenpoint, and then I was going to the bagel shop this morning and realized that, it was sort of right in front of me, the deli that I was going to be eating at for lunch, most likely. Just the shadows were hitting it perfectly. The morning lights coming in, and I was just, captivated by this building, sort of a weird conglomeration of all these different parts. So I snapped a few pictures, and we're going to give it a shot today. Um, so I guess I could share some of the materials I use typically for on-site sketching. Can everybody see the actual palette here with my work? Okay.
Yeah, and I love it because you have a really authentic palette. Sometimes I have the impulse giving demos or other artists that we should clean things up, but
Yeah.
the reality is that I always have kind of a palette gray going on, and yours
This
looks.
is very much in use, in progress. I have this, wrapped for my brushes to carry. I have, you know, however many brushes I just happen to be carrying at the time. Right now, maybe I have 10. I really only use two of these brushes, probably during a painting, maybe three. A larger brush for my washes, something like this that can hold a lot of water.
And let's see, folks are going to be curious. Are those Princeton, if I'm recognizing them, the long red ones?
Yes. Okay. These are Escoda.
Escoda, okay.
Alvaro Castagnet, who I looked up his work when I bought these, and I was like, wow, he's a pretty incredible watercolor painter. Um, probably knows a thing or two about brushes. So these are great for on site. They're really thick. I really like just how they feel in my hand. Um, these two are from an art space called Happy Medium here in New York, who I actually do some workshops with. And they make their own brushes, and they're really also really fantastic for washes. And then, yeah, the smaller ones, I think I have Princeton, No Name, another Princeton. They're all round, ranging from size 2 to size 6. And really, I'm mostly using, um, when I do this, I think this is a 4. Actually, maybe it's a 3. This is sort of my main go-to for sketching, along with a wash, a brush for a wash. And if I really want to get into the details, I'll go down to the 2. But honestly, often I'll only use a single brush, just because you can get the tip wet and it makes the same line. So that's my brush setup. I actually will leave a couple of these out to do the demo. Try those. And then I really like the Arches or Arch watercolor paper block. This is a 140-pound cold press. Um, I also use a 300-pound cold press. This is actually a 12 by 16 block, kind of on the larger side of what I can hold, and actually have in my hands on site. I mostly stand because there's not typically a good place to sit in New York, that has the perfect light and the perfect shadow or the perfect scene. So I'm often standing with this, with my palette here from Art Toolkit, um, which has, gosh, you know, a lot of colors. Can't even remember what some of them are.
We'll try
Um,
to get a list from you. We can put it in the description after.
yeah, I know that I have indigo, moon glow, um, burnt sienna. Uh, I'm drawing a blank on which yellow
Yellow
this is.
ochre or raw sienna?
That's yellow ochre. Yep. Naples yellow for a little bit of white in it. I rarely ever use this, but that's Payne's gray. This is green gold. Um, this is actually a green that is a gouache color. Don't remember the name. And then these are sort of my secondary. I rarely go over here. There's another sort of similar burnt sienna. There's alizarin crimson. There's, I call it Statue of Liberty green. I think it's actually Windsor green blue shade, but it has a nice, it's a nice turquoise color. And then this opera pink, which I love this color. The paint dries really quickly, or hardens really quickly, so it's kind of hard to reactivate this color. But when I can get it, it's like a nice little like punch at the end of a painting. And then I keep just randomly falling off my palette all the time. Some brighter, um, I think most of these are gouache from a tube that I've squeezed in. Um, and I don't really recall what colors they are, except for ultramarine, which I really love, this like deep blue for my shadows. Um, and yeah, that's my setup. I also use, I'm going to grab it real quick because we're here.
And while you're grabbing that too, we've got a question about why long-handled brushes compared to shorter ones, if you have any preference there.
One reason is they fit really well in this watercolor board that I got from a plug for Woodward and Father. Katie Woodward's another Brooklyn sketcher who makes these. And then goes really well with, yeah, the palette here. And then they fit great in there. And this also has a place for my water cups. But I really actually just like the feeling of them, more than anything. Just a nice, thick, kind of um, big brush that I get very like, I say heavy-handed with this. I like to press really hard, and it sort of has, that ability to like, push back and just feels really good.
Oh, all about finding what feels good for sure, and that intuitive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is basically my setup. I'll rotate colors in and out, depending on the mood. Whenever I do workshops or do an urban sketching event, I'm always asking people, "Hey, what color is that? Oh, hey, what color do you use there?" Hey, just trying to like have like a running list of my paint colors that I want to buy, and then we'll insert them in from time to time. But these are sort of my classic go-to I've had success with over the last couple of years.
Hmm. Well, thanks for giving us a little dive into supplies. And so I'm trying to imagine now, here's you, Gavin, walking down the street, and you come upon something you like. So what do you do to kind of get yourself situated? Do you have like a little stool, or you just hold your board in front of you? Um,
Yeah, I wish I had
what's
a
the vision
stool.
there?
I see sketches of stools. I'm like, oh, I should buy one of those, and I never do. So yeah, I usually set my bag on a trash can or a bench or something that's just covered in filth, and then I just unload everything in sort of a chaotic way, and then I do stand, lean my bag against my leg, and just kind of try to be in the moment, and you know, listen to people, talk to people. I do think that some maybe it is something about the standing, or maybe it's just New York. People do sort of have this, or maybe it's just creating art. People want to talk about their art. They want to ask you what you're doing. They want to like share something they've created, and it's just sort of this real like um, democratizing influence where all of a sudden everybody has this like common thing to share. And so I really love that aspect, that sort of social aspect. I try not to have headphones in um, when I'm painting because, there's this sort of opportunity for these human connection, these great moments. And I try to write down what happened to me in that painting like session after I'm done. And that kind of is part of the piece of art, it's kind of part of the thing I'm creating that day is that memory of the place and who I
Mm,
spoke to and what the weather was like and what I heard and what I did.
yeah, yeah. Oh, the whole experience. Oh, all right. I like that vision of you. I can see it in my head here. So
Yeah,
today with us, you don't, we're not in front of this really cool spot, but you were there this morning. So,
right.
uh, and yeah, so you're going to walk us through kind of a sketch as you might be out doing it in the world, or what's your approach today?
Yeah, so another thing I like to do, again, just kind of a personal approach, not the right approach or wrong approach, is I typically just start a painting blind, no pencil lines. I say not no planning. You'll see that it is planned, but building it up from light to dark. And I found this is actually a way to fight against my sort of perfectionist impulses. If I go there and I just start painting and just say go. Then it always ends up somehow having a little more life and a little more um, resonance with me or with the people who see it than it does if I sort of plan everything out perfectly in my studio and use a ruler or use an image transfer or something. And again, I work both ways, and it's very difficult to recreate that sort of like snappy moment of creativity when you
Yeah,
are drawing from an image on your screen and you can infinitely zoom in. There's
yeah.
something wonderfully limiting about going straight to the page and not having really any plan when you go out there. So sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm going to paint this whole row of brownstones. And I get going and I'm like, oh no, I only have room for two. Okay, well, today my painting's going to be these two brownstones, even though I thought maybe before it was going to be this entire scene. So I really try to embrace those sort of like unintentional, unexpected consequences of my methods and just roll with it, knowing that I can always return. So that's what I'm going to do today. Um, should I start the demo? Should I start painting?
Yeah, let's do it. Put some paint on paper. And
Perfect.
I wanted to just mention too, there's an artist friend of ours, Mark Terrell Holmes, Canadian based, and every June he runs a direct watercolor challenge where he says for
Ooh.
30 days, get everyone to dive in. So that's his word, that's where I sort of learned about the idea of the direct watercolor. It just made me think of that. You might enjoy checking out his work.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah, that sounds great. I would love to take that challenge and not feel so alone. All right, so I'm going to try to keep this from wobbling too much, but we're just going to go with it. And I'll kind of talk through what I'm doing, but feel free to stop me, ask questions throughout. And I'm just going to go in. And what I basically do is use my wash to map out the drawing, to map out to plan it. And this is sort of my pencil line. So I'm just going to get like the very basic red facade color and just start to shape the painting. And my whole approach that I've sort of been toying with, or how I've been trying to describe my work, which maybe isn't a new thing or a novel thing, but I think of it almost like sculpture. And as a sculptor, as Michelangelo here today, I have this white page, which is my big block of marble, totally blank, could be anything, kind of intimidating. And what I'm going to do is slowly just chip away at this block of marble, piece by piece, and start to carve out detail and um, carve out something, some form in the block of marble. And so right now I'm using a big brush, I'm using big strokes, I'm using a lot of water, and I'm just kind of making these first marks to plan out the sculpture that I'm creating. So
I love that analogy to sculpture of sort of thinking about sort of creating dimension out of something flat. And I noticed too, you're working like pretty wet and letting some colors, mix together, wet and wet, as you're laying them on the page.
yeah, there's not necessarily, I know that whatever I do here will show through to the final piece. Watercolor being transparent, it's one of the wonderful things. You can get some of these really complex, deep colors by having multiple layers. But I also know that what I do here doesn't particularly matter because I can go over it and correct it, so to speak. Um, I can also do things like you said, like this is still really wet up here, so I can drop colors in and see, oh, maybe I want it to be a little more red, or maybe I want to get a little bit of yellow here, where the sun's hitting. So I can kind of, while this is drying, keep adding pigment, keep adding paint to my page, and sort of, keep modifying that color or making it a little closer to what I want the final piece to be. And I'm also, you'll notice the first thing I actually do, I back up from after my watercolor now or my sculpture analogy, is that I like to find the brightest white in the scene. Now, it's much easier to do some days on a page than it is out in the world. But right now I'm looking at it, I'm saying like, okay, what's the brightest white? And it's these areas around the windows, sort of the frames around the windows. It's the signage, it's the sign at the deli, it's these doors. And it's also, in this case, I'm going to make the decision right now to leave the sky as white to sort of make the buildings pop off the page. And I'm going to leave these spaces completely blank. I'm not going to use a color here. I'm just going to use the white of the page and sort of negative space um, to the effect of building up around these white areas. So I'm going to sort of start to push the water around here and shape this strange attachment, cupola. I'm not sure what you would call it, rotunda. Maybe somebody who's uh, has a more in-depth architectural background can help me with this one here. I chose this subject because I really like this sort of strange assemblage of parts and pieces of this building, and also just the tremendous way like the light was coming across the facade. And often when I do go out, I won't have a plan necessarily, or my plan will get sort of changed up in the middle because I'll think, oh, I'm going to go, I'm going to go paint at Central Park today, and I'm going to paint, I don't know, the pond. Well, maybe the light's wrong, or maybe it's raining, and I'm forced to go to another place, or I just see something along the way that isn't even in the park, and that draws me there. So I try to embrace those unexpected, sort of those great New York moments where something just catches your eye, where the light's hitting the building in just the right way. And I try to like listen to those things, and even if I don't paint what I set out to paint that day, I usually have a good time doing it. So,
I think it's neat you're working sort of section by section, but in blocks of color. So it seems like you're working sort of in little washes, so you're not waiting for a great big wash of the big.
yeah, that's right. And another reason, I guess, for this is, again, there's a sort of seasonal aspect to watercolor. What works in one season doesn't work in others. I've been so frustrated painting in the winter lately because the there's been a lot of moisture in the air in New York the past couple weeks, and it also just the cold weather. The paint takes so long to dry. So I was watching a demo from another painter, I think from a few weeks ago, and she was saying how she mixes her water with a little vodka or a little gin. I'm like, I have to do that. What have I
Yeah, yeah.
been?
I've done
Um,
that too in Arctic and in polar regions. Though I think I often don't paint in the field as much on the heavier watercolor paper for that reason of wanting something that'll dry really fast. But your approach seems pretty compatible with it.
yeah, and so I have to, do two things. I have to say, okay, like keep the washes a little more small and measured, so that with the full knowledge that like, by the time I get back to this and start to add things again, I'd really like this to be dry so it doesn't, the water's not moving on me across the page. Or I say, okay, I don't have control over this. And one of the sort of, constraints of this painting is going to be that the water is going to move and bleed a lot, and I'm just going to embrace that and sort of use that to create a different work of art than I would have if it were, 85 degrees and sunny outside. So really, that I think I've kind of, I don't know how many years I've been doing watercolor now. I think maybe I started in 2019. But it took me a few to really realize, you know, how that media will react in all these different circumstances. And now that I know, I can sort of use that to my advantage. But still sometimes your intention and what actually ends up happening on the page is not the same. So gotta roll with it.
Oh gosh, we could all use that like sign of just gotta roll with it.
Yep.
So many things.
Oh yeah. If only it were so easier said than done.
All right, what's
Um,
that vibrant red you're using? Look at that just pop up
that
there.
is the alizarin crimson actually, which has a really nice sort of magenta color. But also when you mix it with the burnt sienna, it really feels like a brick, sort of a red brick color. So I really like to keep that a little bit on my sort of on my secondary color palette. It's also really good in shadows. So that alizarin crimson will mix really well with a blue, or just add this like really like vibrant punch to a shadow, which I find to be like really fun to drop those moments of color into the shadow.
So we've got a question from one of our viewers that their daughter-in-law in Brooklyn will be watching this recording soon and wonders if you're willing to share the cross street. So if they want to go visit it.
Yes, this is at the Metro Gourmet Deli is at the corner of 4th Ave and 9th Street in Park Slope. So it's right by the subway station, um, right by the bagel shop that I was at this morning, Shelsky's Bagels, and pretty easy to get to from I think the F train, G train, and the R train, if I'm remembering correctly.
So I think the other thing I'm noticing as you're painting is like, not only are you doing this direct, straight watercolor, in this phase at least, you're not doing a lot of mixing. I mean, you're letting the colors mix on the page, but not mixing a lot on your palette, pretty direct.
Yeah, I typically do like how they mix on the page. I will start to, you'll see me get into my palette, especially when I'm doing shadow colors. Um,
Mhm.
but right now I am trying to keep sort of, these pure, like very simple washes, because they'll get layered on top of with other colors. Also, you'll see I have this sort of muddy, I don't know, brown, all sorts, this weird combination of colors. And this is
I call
probably
it
why
palette gray.
there you go. Yeah, palette gray. Exactly. This is why I don't need to keep a gray in my palette that I really use because it's all right here. So I'm going to start to go back up here and add the cornice of the building with some sort of strange neutral gray.
And as you're painting on site, how long are you typically spending?
Anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. If I'm really going for a large piece and um, sort of also maybe using pen and ink on top of watercolor, and have a really big scene, I'll spend up to 2 hours. But typically, I find more time does not make for a better painting with my style. So I try to keep that sort of, that sort of hour and a half limit. That often becomes 30 minutes when it's, if it's very cold outside. Yeah, it's closer to 30 or 45 minutes. And if it's warm and beautiful, I'll stretch it out. Um, and do a little bit of like documentation of the work too, snap some photos, snap a few videos, try to keep um, that sort of aspect of it going as well.
Do you ever develop pieces in like your studio pieces from field work?
Sometimes, yeah, it's funny. Like, my studio pieces are often specific commissions for, for somebody. They may include a person or they may include some depiction of a figure in them. So I'll want a little more control over what I'm doing. But yeah, I will, or I'll come back, during the winter and say, oh man, I really like this photo I snapped, um, back in the summer. How would I approach it if I'm painting in my studio? And I try to sort of hack my brain to give myself similar constraints, knowing that the constraints kind of make it fun for me and often lead to like slightly better results. I'll try to create constraints for me in my studio as well. Like, okay, I'm going to film this one and it's going to take me 45 minutes, or I'm going to, um, not use any digital sort of reference, but just use a photo that I can't zoom into or that I have to put, some distance away so it's like I'm there painting. Um, but they do sometimes cross over. Yeah.
Oh, I
Gonna
just
say,
I just love the mixing on your page. It's beautiful, that red into the ochre and sienna.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel like these are the moments where like caring about it less helps me in the final piece because I will sort of start to get again more and more precise. Like you see now, I'm really getting an architectural detail here with this awning and sort of using this brush almost more like a pen or a pencil, also using much thicker paint. So it's this building up of color that it's really nice when you do have something that's a little more amorphous, a little less definite below it, and then you can start to actually like solidify it with darker, stronger lines.
We've got a question if you use different brands of watercolor or mostly Daniel Smith.
Oh, I did name quite a few Daniel Smith watercolors. I have also many Winsor and Newton watercolors in my palette. These specifically are um, a Japanese company, which I'm drawing a blank on the name of. So it's a combination of Daniel Smith and Winsor and Newton at the moment. Um, yeah, and it just depends on, like it's weird. There's really like depending on the watercolor manufacturer, some of them are so good in one, and you use the other, the exact same color, and it's like, huh, it doesn't quite do what I want it to do. So that's also a little bit of trial and error, which I'm sure everybody has their own personal preferences.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
So right
enjoying this
now,
emphasis on shape. It's really freeing that, the emphasis isn't on like precision necessarily, but from my eye at least, seems like you're paying attention to so many of the relationships.
right, right, that's a good way to describe it. You're wanting you like if even if this building had was 5 stories and I only drew four, or didn't quite get the exact number of windows right or the spacing, it's almost like how it relates to the other architectural elements is much more important than that. Also, since you're not going to be able to see the reference after I'm done with it, I try to really, really, use techniques of motion and almost like the flick of a wrist to create certain architectural elements and sort of start to embrace rhythm rather than actually worrying about, man, did I get, you know, every railing of that balcony in the correct spot? Because if you do start to approach it like an architectural drawing, for me personally, I go a little crazy.
Mm.
It's nice to sort of remove yourself from that, the getting it right, and focus on the value, focus on light and dark, focus on color, and then it will appear right to your eye.
And
Right now,
really
adding another. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we had a great sort of observation and question kind of related to your approach is preserving
Uh-huh.
whites between the volumes and the buildings is part of your style. And if you can share it all, how you choose to leave those spaces.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think that they do twofold. They give the painting depth. Um, like when you place a really bright white next to a darker dark, or even sort of medium shadow, um, your eye is just drawn to that white, and it does start to give this tremendous amount of depth. I don't think I'm necessarily consciously thinking about it, but it is part of my mapping process from the beginning. Looking at this image and knowing where those whites are at the top of the windows, at the top of the cornice, this sort of detail here and down at the base of the building also. it's a little bit of planning initially, but, and then I just sort of go for it. So I'm, thickening and strengthening this red, almost using the same color of wash back over it, sort of start to make it more definite. And I'm almost at the point now where I'm like, okay, I kind of have my scene mapped. I haven't really touched the bottom here. Maybe I'll add a little bit of detail to the foreground. But I actually like to leave the foreground until the end because oftentimes I will use more negative space there again to sort of draw your eye from this lower portion of the page where sort of a lot's happening, cars are parking, people are moving, and focus you right in on where the detail and sort of um, the actual subject of the painting is, which is often the facade of the building.
We've got a couple more comments and questions. You mentioned that you like to transition to more control. Is that one of the roles gouache plays in your palette?
Yes, because that's a less transparent media and has, sort of, brighter, bolder, darker properties, it really does start to, yeah, help you shape that detail. And it is one of the last, elements I use in that carving out, is using that with a smaller brush, almost like, you know, pen and ink or pencil on top of the watercolor wash. So I'm kind of at this area where I have it mapped out. Here's my architectural scene. I'm going to look back at my painting and say, okay, the next thing that I think I want to approach is the windows. Now I'm going to be really careful with the windows here. Um, just use a little bit of, um, gosh, which blue am I using? I should know this. The cerulean blue, I will remember the name of it before I'm done with this workshop, or at least go check my painting here. And I'm going to start to just add just squares of color for the windows. And sorry, were there a few more questions I could answer?
Oh, we just got a nice comment that the round window is called an oriel window, the rounded bay on the
Ooh,
corner.
I love
Drex
it.
sort out that mystery. So
Thank
crowdsource a
you.
little architecture information here.
This is great. No, I should, I should draw with an audience more often. I would probably learn a lot.
And so I noticed too, you're being careful with those to not touch your other paint for
Yeah, if I do, hit the edge and it runs or picks up some of the red, great. But I'm really trying to preserve these whites on the edges to make these windows pop and or rather less pop and more recede in the composition. And again, this is another element where I like to get the paper a little wet and then just sort of it's like with a pencil, you're shading from an edge, drop color at the top, and just let it flow down the page and just kind of, cede control to the paint and let it do what it does best, which is flow. Um, and sort of just use those properties of water and the watercolor to my advantage. Because, the great thing about the media is, as anybody who's used it can attest, there is a little bit of a lack of control. And this sort of ability to create colors you never would have been able to mix in your palette. Um, you can predict it in a certain way, but at some point you're a little bit at the mercy of the media. So I sort of like to try to use that to my advantage. And if it's not working out for me, just go with it.
I mean, with art watercolor too, boy, if you don't embrace that uncertainty, it can get frustrating too. So enjoying that
Right, right.
that
And
element is I think a key part of the practice.
exactly. It's like can be the most therapeutic process ever, or the least, depending on the day and what your intentions are. So, exaggerating a little bit, of course, but uh, I really find, yeah, like losing yourself and letting that, literally getting into that flow state is when the best, and sort of most exciting watercolor compositions happen for me.
Yeah, agreed. I like your contrast of warm and cool colors here too, with the windows and the warm building.
Oh yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I have, often I'll use my two water cups if I'm sketching on site, one for warm colors and one for cool colors. And then you get this kind of nice muddy water that you can use. Here, I have enough water that it doesn't really pick up the color underneath it. So it doesn't matter so much. Um, but yeah, it is a little bit of playing with the nature of those two things back and forth, the warm and the cool, and sort of switching back and forth between. And you'll see I'm jumping around on the page a lot. Um, you know, not to say at random, but I'm kind of waiting for certain sections to dry, trying to bring it all up to a certain level at a time, and
Mhm.
not letting one area get finished before the others.
We've got another question. Is this your typical pace of painting? I mean, obviously, besides having someone interrupt you with questions,
Yeah,
that's
it is.
part of your
And the
process.
questions are actually I think part of my practice or when I'm really enjoying myself the most. It's not when I'm in the studio sort of with perfect conditions. It is when I'm outside in the world, just, somebody looking over your shoulder, um, somebody, yelling for the truck to move beside you, somebody, trying to park in front of you. There's sort of this nice element of New York, that buzzy feeling of being out in the world and having, you know, I talked about it being a little bit like an athletic event. And when you're in New York, it's also a little bit of a performance. You're like, putting yourself out there and you know, letting people sort of see what you do as you do it, and all the wrinkles and sort of mistakes that may come with it. So I really find that actually helps free me and we're
Mhm.
less about the mistakes. And, it's just a fun sort of way to feel like, you're a part of the city and part of something that's not just, you and your studio. Of course, another way to do that is to broadcast it across the world, which, thanks for doing that for us today.
Oh, our pleasure.
All right. So again, I'm, kind of using this as an in-between. Um, I'm still using big strokes, but I'm getting a little bit more precise and starting to scatter my paints and get a little bit more frantic here. Um, Start to add some foreground elements with my ultramarine gouache here, a mailbox, all those great little elements of a New York street that you sort of don't even pay attention to in your day to day. And then when you start to paint them, you realize like, you know, these are everywhere.
And just like everything, you've just got this nice big emphasis on shape.
Yeah, right now it's really again like I'm roughing out this piece of marble. I'm blocking things. I'm sort of using big areas and big washes of color still. And it doesn't really change the technique throughout. It just sort of gets a little bit more precise as we go along. So um, the shape of an awning being this sort of um, strange parabola here. And I'm just trying to use just flicks of the wrist and strokes of my paintbrush and not worry too much about getting it exactly right. Um, and
Do you
just
ever
kind
play
of
with flat brushes?
I never have actually. I don't know why. Maybe it's a fear. Maybe it's fear. The unknown. Certainly, a lot of great work is driven by fear. But no, no. Do you think that, do you find those are useful for like the blocking that I'm doing?
Yeah, when I've done it, sometimes I struggle a little bit sometimes with a round to get some of the nice sharp corners that you're getting, and I
Ah,
yeah, I mean you're so practiced at it, but um, an old mentor artist friend of mine introduced me to the work of an artist named Elliot O'Hara, and
okay.
he basically painted exclusively with flats, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Interesting.
Anyhow, your work just made me think of it with all the nice big broad architectural marks. Um,
No, that's really interesting. It's funny. I have not tried it, not for any real reason, just as like a comfort thing. But I do find the way I'm able to get um, crisp edges. I really like crisp edges, um, and get them with this round brush is to use a lot of water and a lot of paint. And I found, from leading workshops or sort of seeing um, people who are like a little less practiced with watercolor or beginning, and also knowing how I operated when I first started, is that there's a tendency to treat it like acrylic or like oil, where you're using much more paint and much less water. And it's actually almost this counterintuitive thing where you have a lot more control if you use more water, because you get that surface tension and the water beads up on the page and it won't move or you don't push it. And I really try to, embrace that.
Oh, that's such a terrific suggestion. Because you do get those nice clean edges, and that water bead helps create those.
Yeah. So I'm going to go now to sort of the next step in the process. And I'm going to start to build up this three-dimensionality. If you look back at this image, and I think the reason I was so drawn to the scene today is the shadows are just incredible, this morning light. So I'm going to start to use some very dark darks and also some very medium sort of middle tones to create the depth both in the facade and in the shadows hitting the facade. This is where my moon glow and indigo are the most used colors in my palette because they really double as like a black and a gray. Um, and they really become, these sort of essential colors to me. And this is also when I get into the sort of rhythm of architecture and I say, okay, here's a cornice. How do you paint a cornice? I don't really know what's going on here. Some sort of strange cast iron thing happening. Or, maybe it's just sheet metal. And I'm just going to make some marks and connect these areas of light and dark and suggest the architectural detail without quite knowing what's going on up there.
Yeah, you talked earlier about just capturing the rhythm and not being worried as much about maybe the exact correct number, but getting that
Right. And,
idea of them.
yeah, architecture is rhythmic, structure, architectural structures have, regular spacing. They have, a structural logic to them and sort of these even intervals. So especially when you're drawing something like a bridge, you can just sort of move your hand at even intervals across the page and, approximate what you're seeing. And it's, a lot more fun than actually trying to figure out exactly how many columns or beams or things are happening. And right now I'm going to get these arch details here, which is super fun. You see that the sunlight is just hitting one side. So this piece of stone is sort of broken up in the middle by shadow. And I'm going to start to hit the right side of my window here with a dark color um, where the sun is, casting the deepest shadow. And I can kind of just do the same without thinking about it too much, use that same motion, shade the same edge on every one of the windows on the facade, and sort of bring it up to the same level. And get some of these really nice ornate brick details.
Oh, I just love how quickly shadows snap things together.
Oh, it's totally like,
So
I
fast.
think there's this moment of when I'm doing a demo, like, I look at it like right before I go to this step, I'm like, oh no, what's happening here? Like, is this gonna turn out? And then as soon as you start to give that little bit of depth and dimension, it's like, oh yeah, okay, we're good.
And is your paper totally dry, or is it like mostly dry and you're just going for it?
Um, it's dry except for some parts like the windows. So these areas of wash are totally dry. If it wasn't, you'd see the paint moving on me a little more.
Yeah.
But luckily, I'm talking a lot, so I'm hopefully not moving too slow. But yeah. And this is the fun part where I almost, always like drawing the building to the side of the building that's my like subject more because I get a little looser. I just have a little more fun with it. So I'm always like, oh, if I had done this building like I did the one next to it, that would have been tremendous. But alas, it's tricking your brain into being more free, I think is something I'm always struggling with.
That's a good game to play.
Yeah. And some days, it really works, and some days it's flowing, and other days it's a little more of a struggle, but that's all right. How's your painting going? Are you tackling the same subject as well?
I am. I confess though, it's a little feels a little more easy to look at what you're doing and be like, I'm going to do what Gavin's doing. And I'm trying to like, ground myself in the reference image as well. My paper's not drying quite as quick as yours, but I'm just going for it. And I find it really freeing to have that looser underpainting and then those crisp darks on top. And it's just so fun not to have the pen or pencil. It feels just lighter.
Yeah, there's just a little bit, you're like, oh, I can't get this exactly right. So I don't have to try. Um, I had a professor in school tell me the best way to wait, the two lessons this guy imparted on us. The dean of our school, his name was John Gaunt, and he said, if you draw the wrong line, draw the right one next to it. So I always try to remember that. So there never is a wrong line because you can always draw the right one next to it. And then he said which maybe seems obvious, or maybe it's a common technique, which a lot of artists probably know. The easiest way to draw a straight line is to draw a squiggly line. So my natural, I have a little bit of natural ability to draw a straight line and a lot of practice as an architect, but it's not a very like um, easy thing to do with your hands. So you almost want to get just a little bit of a wiggle with every line you draw, and it makes it so much easier to sort of trace that straight line.
Hmm. Oh,
What
what
am
a
I,
cool tip. Okay. I'm playing here. A little bit of a wiggle.
all right. What I'm going to do up here is use the same color on this window here, on the same color at a different value, a much um, deeper, thicker paint to add this architectural detail on top of the existing wash. So it's just the exact same burnt sienna, but just with much more paint and much less water.
So with all your experience with these subjects, you've got a vocabulary too of some of your base colors you like to approach these with, which minimizes some of the decision making you probably are doing on site too of here's,
You're right. Once you realize that you can paint most anything with like the yellow ochre, the burnt sienna, the indigo, um, and the alizarin crimson, you don't need a whole lot of colors in your palette. Um, Again, yeah, I'm probably using 6 of these every painting I do. Um, and so then I'll try to fight against that too, sort of that predictability. And I will say, okay, I'm going to draw this one with just these 3 colors. And they're not going to have anything to do with what's, actually happening in the world. They're going to be, it's going to be, or I'm just going to use primary colors for this one, or I'm just going to use blue. So kind of giving myself challenges and limits to keep me on my toes a little bit is something I like to do to make sure I'm not, just sort of relying on the same techniques or tricks every time.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Giving yourself little games and help encourage growth.
Totally. And I always sort of say this thing is that the paintings I hate the most while I'm doing them, where I'm just like, I should have quit. Like, this one's not turning out, I totally want to rip it up, start over again on a different page. I always try to push through because I oftentimes realized that what was happening there wasn't, that I was creating this awful, terrible work of art that wasn't worth seeing. It was that I was learning something and discovering something new. And, learning something can often be painful. So I try to like, okay, even if this isn't the one, even this isn't what I hope to paint today, I try to push through those moments of discomfort and just say, we're just going to see where it goes. We're going to see what happens. And often that's the case.
Oh, that's such good advice, Gavin. And I feel like too, it's worth finishing a painting, like seeing what the darks do can change so much, an initial
Yeah, there's
approach.
many
So it's
different
worth just
steps.
finishing.
Right. And it might be that last shot. It might be the painting isn't complete until you finally figure out that last shadow or that last little bit. So you can't quite judge it until it is done. And even then, it's like, writing and editing should be 2 different processes when you're writing. It's almost like that with creating a work of art. You shouldn't really be judging it while you're doing it. I mean, you should be thinking about how you're approaching it, but I'll often just like put it away. I'm not going to look at this. I sign my name, I'm done, and then come back to it tomorrow and we'll see how we feel about it because you may feel completely different.
We've got some folks who will relate to the feeling of hating everything halfway through.
Yeah.
And another question, do you angle your paper at all, or do you typically paint flat?
I am often angling, especially to in those early wash stages, to mix my colors. But for the most part, I will keep it relatively like if I'm holding it, keep it relatively flat. Um, and yeah, about halfway through, my hand will start to be in extreme pain, and I'll be like, "What? Okay, got to get that stool tomorrow," but still haven't done it. Still haven't broken down. I'm going to start to just add, while I'm waiting for these sort of darker details to dry, I'm going to start to add a little bit of the background detail, these kind of buildings in the background. And I'm just going to, again, use my technique of washes and blocks and try to be very, very carefree about it because I don't want this to be the focus or the subject of the painting. I just want it to create a little bit of interest and depth and sort of, send your eye to the actual subject of the painting. So I'm going to start to add some of these buildings in the background.
I have another question. Do you use the same color palette when you're traveling?
Yes, this goes everywhere with me. This is what I use when I'm in my studio painting, um, you know, at any scale, and this is what I'm using when when I'm traveling. So it's basically the same colors, and depending on which tube I'm running out of that day, one may get left behind. But yeah, it's pretty much always this sort of setup. And then I will explore, pen and ink or, bring a colored pencil here and there. Um, with the knowledge that sometimes watercolor isn't the exact media you want to pull out. And, if you're sketching in an art gallery or in an airport but yeah, for the most part, I do try to use the same setup. And, it's a comfort thing, a confidence thing, and also um, just an ease of mobility and knowing what's going to happen with your palette.
Oh, we've got a comment of someone trying to solve the puzzle of your loose pans if they might be kuretake paints.
I believe so. I believe that's correct.
Just crowdsourcing.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Oh my goodness, the time has been flying by. I've just been immersed in
Oh,
sketching a bunch of
well.
things here.
Yeah.
So I wonder, as you are putting on your last details, if you can tell us some of the other cool things you've got coming up, or ways that people can stay connected to your work and know what's going on with you.
Yes. Well, you can follow me on Instagram, social media as Gavin DeDraw. That's Gavin Dedraw. I teach a series of workshops here in New York, in Brooklyn, called at an art space called Happy Medium, and also one coming up at an art space called the Knife Factory. So some in-person workshop opportunities here, and then yeah, I'm just basically out and about painting just about every week. So you might see me if you are in New York, you might see me on the sidewalk, struggling to figure out how to do the shadows on a building.
Okay, now I warned you I might pull this out, Gavin, which
All
is
right.
you generously shared 2023 art goals with us like a little over a year ago. So
Yes.
I thought I'd
I
bring
had
back
forgotten
your
until you told me.
goal for 2023
Yeah.
and give you a moment to reflect on it. So I'm just going to read this to you, okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm most rewarded by art, this is me as Gavin, when it's not a solitary activity. My goal for 2023 is to learn from and collaborate with artists in varying fields. How does my painting intersect with music, dance, sculpture, food, or fashion? I have no idea. I've always wanted to paint artists at work in their studios. Maybe that's the first step. On a similar note, I'd like to escape my comfort zone more often and challenge myself with new media. What better way to do that than by learning from other artists? Awesome goal.
Yeah. Did I totally achieve it? It's in progress. I would say that speaking of the other media, I took my wife Lindsay and I took an oil painting class this weekend from another artist here called Paul Fernie, who does these incredible, also pretty architectural oil paintings. And wow, to be working in watercolor for like the past 4 years and to have to flip my brain to oil was incredible. I mean, what a cool, like, you know, realizing where the crossover is and what things will work for me and what won't was really transformative. So that I guess just last week I did those things. I've been trying to visit a lot of artists in their studios, including getting my own studio, which I didn't know I would be doing this year. Um, I haven't painted them in their studio yet. So, I guess anybody who, has a studio, has an art practice and wants me to, visit and paint them, feel free to send me a message and I'll see if I can make it. That's something that I would like to do more of. And also the collaborating with other media. Let me think about that. Um, I've drawn a lot of posters for bands, including my own band. So that's something that I still do, but I don't think that's quite the spirit of what I was getting at there. I think I was more trying to get out of my comfort zone. So I think I could still stand to revisit that goal and to sort of, you know, see what that means to me this year.
Awesome. Well, I think goals are fun to have as sort of intentions out there, and then it sounds like you've got some awesome projects and other self-expressions too in the world.
Yeah. There's a Oh, I was going to say I'm doing the shadows now. So this is my favorite part of the drawing is the shadows. So, but if you're, did I say any other goals during that in that interview, or were those was that it?
That was it.
Oh, wow. Okay. Woo, I'm doing all right.
Oh, got some final darks here. All right.
Yeah. So now I'm using moon glow to really, really be a transparent shadow over over basically the existing drawing I have, and sort of getting that final level of depth and detail.
But you still retain some of this beautiful sort of shape-based simplicity.
Yeah, I guess the goal is, with every wash is to let what's beneath it shine through and never get too dark or too muddy with it so that you always sort of have um, the colors you've already put down on the page, adding complexity and depth to the colors you're adding to the page now. So you see this is may take a little bit to dry, may not even, be drying on the page, but by the time we're done with this demo, but you really get through the shining through the moon glow color here. A lot of really beautiful reds and pinks from the wash we already laid down.
Well, now I want moon glow in my palette. That's always the tricky thing about hanging out with other people.
Gotta have it. I think I've heard a lot of sketchers use it, and also the cool thing about moon glow is it kind of into it separates almost into a blue and a red after it's on your page sometimes. It's a really complex, strange color. I don't know how they did it. They really figured it out. But it'll often, yeah, like get these sort of like indefinite turquoise and magenta colors within the purple after it's already on your page. I really think it's tremendous. Yeah, it's just the perfect color for shadows. And I will drop other colors into those shadows. But usually this is the color I use for the basis of them. And just going to try to speed things up here, knowing that we have already gone an hour.
Time has been flying. Do you have a sort of a rubric of when something is done?
Yes, I do have a rule for myself. Um, and we haven't hit it yet, but I'm sure we will. It is when I make a mark that I say, oh, I should have done that. Like, oh, I pushed it one step too far, or oh, I lost something that was in the painting before by making that mark. That's kind of my rule is like, you know what? Maybe it's time to quit, not overwork the painting, and be satisfied with it. So, I don't always have that moment where like, it's not like an oh no moment where I made a mistake. It's almost like, oh, it doesn't actually need that last bit of detail, or it's sort of standing for itself as it is now. And so I try to like make that my rule of when I should stop.
One of our viewers is asking if you've ever tried shadow violet.
No, but I would love to. That's a great recommendation. You can always tell by the name of the color whether it's going to be a good color too. You know, it's one of those. It's it's like a house paint thing. You know, when they have all these silly names, but you can kind of tell by the name of the color whether you're going to like that. You know, whether you're going to like using it or not. And I got a good feeling about shadow violet.
All right, our paint maker friends, take note there.
All right, this is it. Gotta keep. I do find myself, you know, in reality, just as in today, in the more controlled demo, I do find myself speeding up as I go along, making more confident marks, hopefully, and then getting, you know, also just getting tired of, you know, standing for so long. So often, like the last bit of the painting will be the fastest, but also somehow the most precise work that I've done all day.
I'm enjoying comparing the shadow shapes you're painting to the shadows in the image of like that swoop under that front awning. And
Oh yeah, I mean it's just an incredible like the building, the way it's catching the light of the other building, just an incredible scene. You really can't go wrong with the scene. And I'm going to use the shadows to shape, you know, use some negative space to shape like the letters and the sign, and sort of just start to suggest these areas of signage or, you know, some of the detail on the facade. And then I think the most fun part, or one of the most fun parts of the whole painting, is when you do get to be or get to do like the foreground. And I, like I said, I like to leave it blank until the end. But now, you know, I kind of have the building at least to a point. I know I've sort of captured the architecture, at least to some degree. And now I'm going to really use this paintbrush like a pen or a pencil or like pen and ink and start to give like some detail. Use these darker wash colors and you know, really go at the foreground here. And this is where I work on my figures, I work on my cars, you know, two of the banes of the urban sketcher's existence, people and cars, at least for me. So it's always fun to practice them when you are warmed up and kind of have, you know, a sort of confident hand and can just treat them as shapes in areas of light and dark and not worry about whether you're perfectly drawing every curve of a Honda Civic or whatever. And you get fun things like the construction cones and the mailboxes and the signage on the building that you can sort of just really suggest the shapes of without worrying too much about whether you're getting it right or wrong.
gosh, it's how you suggest it that makes it feel so personal to you too. And a painting, not a, you know, you're not trying to replicate.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's, you know, it's like it's the squint test, you know, just sort of softening the gaze and like just getting the essence of the thing, using negative space to your advantage here.
Oh gosh, Gavin, I'm in awe of what you've gotten done painting this in our time together.
Thank you. No, thanks for
And,
the patience here to
oh,
take this journey with me.
well, it's fun to see you push these final details through and happy to hang out a little longer while you put these in. They're so fun to see.
Uh, I did or I used to do something called the delivery truck challenge, where you sit down and you try to paint the delivery truck before, you know, as it unloads, before it drives away. Um, and you know, the nice thing about New York is it turns out those delivery trucks will often park there for hours. So, you know, it's a fun sort of, just quick challenge I like to give myself in New York if I have a little bit of time to kill. And then one of the last things I'm going to do for this painting is add the same wash that I've been putting on the facade of the building, add it to the sidewalk down here. And I might even switch back to my big brush here and really get, this sort of nice gray, purple, sort of indefinite color here. Leaving possibly some, if I do it right, some negative space for the bike lanes and the sort of lines in the um, roadway markings. And again, I'm just connecting these areas of color, letting them bleed into each other a little bit.
And that really grounds the rest of your painting.
Yeah, it's like it's like adding a shadow after you draw a figure. It just sort of makes everything have a base and feel grounded, just like you said.
Well, Gavin, I really love your approach
Thank
and
you.
seeing how you create it. It's just so cool to see. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And this demo will be on in our live demo archive. So if anyone wants to revisit it, um, you'll be able to find it there. And Gavin, I'll just pull our faces back up here. And
Great.
yeah, I really look forward to following your work. And here, I'll give you a peek at mine.
All right, please
I kind
do.
of lost the details at the bottom a little bit, but enjoyed.
Love it. No, oh, there it is. Wow, I feel like I should have been taking the demo from you here.
No,
That's
no, no,
great.
no. I'm kind of a big atmospheric landscape person, and the urban wild is this whole other side of things. And you've given me so many ideas, and I know so many of our viewers' ideas. So, everyone who joined us, thank you for being here and for all of your wonderful comments and questions. And Gavin, we'll have to explore some other fun things to do. Just I love your work. Gosh, someday I wish we could get you out to Port Townsend. So keep us posted if you want
Yeah.
a little Northwest adventure.
Hopefully we'll make it out there to paint exactly the opposite of the urban landscape and get out in the environment. Yeah, thanks for having me, Maria, and thanks to everybody who joined. I really appreciate the opportunity to share and to do what I love. And yeah, I really had a great time. So
So, I
thank
mean,
you.
we've got links to following Gavin in our description as well. So be sure to check out his work and keep in touch with everything he's doing. All right, have a good afternoon, everybody, or evening.
See y'all later.